It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
So let's jump right into these.
Yep.
The first one, they have an inaccurate view of reality.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, Brian. We said this on a recent show that it's often hard for us to really accurately self-assess where we are. If you ask the average American, hey, are you a better driver or a worse driver than the average American? Most folks are going to say, oh, I'm better than average. I'm better than average. But statistically, it's impossible for the majority of folks, for most folks to be better than average, because 50% of those folks have to be worse than average. That's what the average is.
You also see this when we talk about money specifically. If you talk about failure, somebody who's just not doing well with money, usually it's never their fault.
Yep.
It's usually the system's against them, and this is where you hear things, unlucky. This is why people think that wealthy people typically are born into it. They don't realize that over 80% of millionaires are actually first generation. But I think even if you are successful and wealthy, you probably don't consider yourself that way, because we asked, or at least the research has been done, 89% of Americans consider themselves middle class.
So 90% of the working population considers themselves not to be upper class, not to be wealthy, but 90% would say, hey, I'm right there in the middle.
Yeah, as Pew Research found this data, that there's no way, this is just false. I mean, there's a false sense of reality that people, even if you have money, you probably don't think you do. And truthfully, I think there's a lot of people, cuts the other way. There's probably some people who are on, lower middle class or lower on the income scale, and they actually think, hey, I'm part of the middle class. So this is cutting both ways. What the reality is 50% of Americans, because we know statistically that's where the middle is, that's somewhere between $30,000 to $100,000 of income.
So even though 90% of folks would classify themselves as middle class, statistically only about 50% of folks fall into that category.
So let's ask wealthy people, how many of upper income people actually consider themselves to be successful?
Yeah, so again, Pew Research did this. They found only 1% of folks would actually identify themselves as upper class. Only 1% of the population say, oh, okay, I'm in the top echelon. I'm in the upper class echelon.
So we know there's a lot of people, they got some bucks, making good money, still think they're broke.
That's right. Yep. And I would say we even ask our clients this question sometimes. Hey, how would you describe yourself as wealthy? And the answer is always oh, no. Wealthy's the other people. That's not me. It's the other people.
So it's really kind of a state of mind. So I at least this is what I love about mathematics. We can at least go say, hey, where's the bottom 10? Where's the top 10? Where's the top 1%? And here's what we found. The bottom 10% when it comes to income here in the United States is right under $13,000.
And that's single individuals. I think that's the poverty line this year in the United States is right under $13,000 for an individual.
For top 10%, if you have income as an individual at $158,000, you are in the top 10% of what you make. And then top 1% is $738,000. That's a chunk of money.
That's a chunk of money. And I'll be honest, I was kind of surprised by that, right? Because when you think about top 1%, a lot of times you think about athletes and celebrities and these folks that are signing like multi-million-dollar, the Bill Gates and the Warren Buffetts of the world. I don't know that that's the majority of the top 1%. I think the top 1% are folks who have done very, very well for themselves, have a very healthy income, but it's not the folks whose names you might recognize or the folks that you might see on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous.
As we were putting this all together, what I thought of, because remember that stat, that 80% of millionaires are first generation. I had a little southern slang. Did
I heard
you?
that. I like that.
That slow draw snuck in there. But here's what I think, and it probably ties into why I had that draw just then, is that I think people tend to fall back to where they came from more than they realize. So when you hear that only 1% of people think that they're actually successful, we know statistically that's not possible. But I do think there's a lot of people, even if they're successful, if they came from humble beginnings, they kind of still look back that they're part of people who come from humble beginnings. I think the same thing can cut other ways, is that if you come from a very successful family, even if you're doing very well yourself, you might feel poor just because of where you came from. So it's almost, it's the old saying, even for somebody like myself, you can take the boy out of Henry County, but you can't get the Henry County out of him. It's the whole thing. I mean, and I just, because that's where I'm from, but it's you hear that saying all the time.
Absolutely.
And I think that there is something to that. But there's also some blind spots, and this is what I wanted to focus on for how could wealthy people, or they're not wealthy, how could people with
high
good incomes, so rich, not wealthy, but rich, income statement affluent versus balance sheet or net worth affluent, how could they have these blind spots that create this?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and we've actually heard this as we've talked to prospects and clients in the past, is they are under this presumption because their income is so healthy, they're actually in a much better spot than they truly are. They're actually wealthier than they are. And I'm reminded of an individual we were talking to, this is a number of years ago, and we were trying to convince him that he needed life insurance to protect for, he was married and had debt and that sort of thing. They said, hey, you really need life insurance. He said, what? Why would I need that? I make enough money that like we have plenty. I got money in the bank. I got money in savings. I don't need life insurance. And we had to like communicate to him. Well, yes, so long as you don't die, things are great. You got plenty of income. You're going to be okay so long as you save. But if you check out tomorrow, that income all goes away. It's not like that exists past you. Yet he had a hard time recognizing that. He had a hard time thinking, oh, I don't need to insure my needs because my income is taken care of.
He just assumed he was always going to make the same amount of money. And that's, I think you can't take that for granted. I always think small business owners, you guys, you're out there, we have this insecurity that's all going away at any point in time. And I think that's a healthy thing to have a little fear. It's also, these assumptions are eating people alive because you also always assume you'll be healthy. I think that is a great blind spot because some of the biggest financial faults that can derail you is medical expenses. If you had an emergency or something that you haven't saved for. And then what I think is unhealthy, an unhealthy relationship with money is treating money as a goal versus the actual tool that it actually is.
Absolutely. It should not be the end. Money is just a means to an end. It's a mechanism through which you can get to that which you ultimately are trying to accomplish. It's not the goal yourself. Because if you are someone who's structured your life where money or the number or the thing is the goal, you're going to find when you get there, one of two things is going to happen. You're going to move the goalpost, it's going to get further away, or it's going to be incredibly empty. You're going to get there and say, okay, I've got it. Well, now what? And you just don't want to find yourself in that place.